My name is Mary. I just turned 35 this summer. On a sunny day filled with birds singing, I was called into the president's office. Mom, boss. What can I do for you? I asked. Without turning to look at me, my mother, who is also the president of our company, spoke curtly, seeming annoyed by the heat. I've decided to hand the company over to your sister. You're dismissed as of today. The bright summer sunshine made it hard for me to grasp what she was saying. Ha! I guess I sounded pretty confused. My mother, now looking quite irritated, turned to face me. Didn't you hear me? You're fired. We don't need ugliness around here. Be gone by the end of the month. With that, she turned back to the papers on her desk, indicating our conversation was over. In the quiet office, where only birds could be heard, I was still trying to process her words when she snapped at me again. Are you still here? Get back to work immediately. I moved like a puppet, saying, "Excuse me," and left the office, closing the door behind me. Our company is small, just a 2-story building with about 10 employees. It's a family business. My mother is the president, my aunt and her husband are executive directors, and my mom's cousins are managing directors. But my mother holds most of the power. After high school, I worked at an accounting firm. When I was 25, my mother told me they needed an accountant and asked, "Are you going to abandon your family in trouble? You'll be the one in trouble in the end." She basically forced me to join the company. My duties weren't just accounting. My mother dumped all the paperwork and miscellaneous tasks on me. Whenever we were short-handed, I was even sent out for sales. I was the company's jack of all trades. Despite the challenges, I worked hard from morning till night for the past 10 years, making sure everything got done. On the other hand, my sister Lucy, who is 3 years younger at 32, has only been with the company for 2 years. Before joining us, she bounced from job to job, always complaining they weren't a good fit. When she turned 30, she stopped job hunting and spent her days at home. My mother then decided Lucy needed a suitable job and hired her as an executive director. I've been with the company for 10 years, but I'm still a regular employee. Everyone was surprised by the different treatment between us sisters, but I wasn't. My mother has always favored Lucy. Ever since we were kids, my mother would give beautiful Lucy any clothes or toys she wanted and would always praise her, saying, "Lucy, you're so cute. This looks so good on you." On the other hand, since I wasn't as cute as Lucy, I got hand-me-down toys and clothes for my cousins or kids in the neighborhood. My mother would say, "This is good enough for you." When I was a child, I didn't understand why I was treated this way. I worked hard at school and helped around the house trying to get my mother's attention. But even when I handed her my straight-A report card, she barely noticed. I even thought about getting plastic surgery, believing that if I was prettier, I'd get more affection. It was my aunt who explained why my mother ignored me so much. In high school, I was told my father had died. But actually, when Lucy was born, my father ran off with a woman from his workplace. This woman was older than my mother and supposedly less attractive, but she had an aura similar to mine. My aunt, who is my mother's younger sister, casually said, "Your mom is a proud woman." She couldn't bear the thought of losing her husband to an older, less attractive woman. As she spoke, she seemed to take a certain delight in my mother's predicament. My aunt wasn't particularly remarkable in appearance, leaning more towards my side of the family. She could be a handful, but she was good at her job, mostly using her charm to get ahead. My mother took over the family business at the age of 32 when my father left. She used her striking beauty to attract and retain clients, which significantly boosted the business. Part of the growth was due to the era, with many buildings needing demolition after reaching their lifespan. Because of this, neither my aunt's family nor my cousins could really go against my mother. Recently, the costs of industrial waste disposal and transportation had increased, making it hard to balance demolition costs and actual expenses. The entire industry was struggling, and it was a challenge to even pay the employees each month. During these tough times, my younger sister joined the company as an executive director. I wondered how my mother would manage to pay Lucy's salary. She bluntly said, "We'll cut your salary to pay hers. We're family, that's natural, isn't it?" I replied, "Even if you cut my salary, it's still not enough to pay her a salary fitting an executive director." I thought it was a reasonable argument, but as always, my mother was relentless. "It's your job to figure that out. Just make it work," she said. Tentatively, I suggested, "Shouldn't Lucy start as a regular employee?" My mother gave me a fierce glare and snapped, "Who do you think you're talking to?" This isn't something for someone like you to interfere with. At that time, we were all living under the same roof. Lucy didn't contribute a dime to the household, while I put $1,500 into the household every month. Even when Lucy joined the company, she didn't contribute anything. Since I was young, I had been helping around the house for my busy mother and naturally did the household chores, whereas Lucy did nothing, acting as if it was the norm. "Hey sis, is dinner ready yet?" Lucy would call to ask about dinner when I was working overtime. When I told her to make something for herself because I was working, Lucy said, "What? I don't know what to make. The kitchen is your sanctuary, right? I don't want to get scolded for using it without permission. You got mad at me for that before." She never attempted to cook, using that past incident as an excuse. Lucy never cleaned up after herself and never put things back where they belonged. She was still holding a grudge from the time I scolded her for that and used it as an excuse to not do anything. Often, I had to reluctantly come home to prepare dinner and then head back to the office to continue working. My mother usually didn't cook dinner either. Even when I prepared meals, she often just ate out, choosing whatever she felt like eating. However, lately, as my mother frequently went out for business meals with Lucy, I had less need to cook dinner. But the increase in entertainment expenses was causing a new headache. My mother, now 63, was starting to complain more often about various aches, pains, and the effects of heavy drinking. It was during this time that I was called into the CEO's office and told, "I'm handing the company over to Lucy. You who are not as attractive are fired." I could understand my mother's decision to hand the company over to Lucy, given her past actions. After all, Lucy was 32, the same age my mother was when she became the CEO. Perhaps my mother thought that with the right timing, Lucy could use her beauty to get work done, just like she did. However, I could not accept being fired because of my appearance. Even if my salary was redirected to Lucy, I didn't see the merit in it. When I consulted my aunt, it seemed that the news of Lucy becoming the CEO had already spread among the employees. However, my being fired was news to my aunt as well. After pondering for a bit, my aunt said, "Well, I don't quite understand. But it seems like Lucy has been saying behind the scenes that she doesn't like the fact that even if she tells everyone she's going to do something at the company, everyone says it's okay because they'll ask Mary for help. Maybe that's part of the reason. But that's only because everyone stopped asking Lucy because she only does sloppy work, right?" "Indeed," my aunt replied. "Lucy is utterly incompetent at her job. She always misses deadlines, makes mistakes on the phone, and has many typographical errors. Even though she has some work experience, she seems completely unaware of her lack of ability, perhaps because her beauty has always led to men covering up for her." She had never reflected on her actions. My aunt, understanding this, said, "Well, that's true, but I think she sees you as a nuisance." She continued, "But I never thought they would fire you. Without you, the company won't be able to function." She sighed, seeming troubled, but she didn't argue with my mother because she knew she couldn't win. I felt utterly disgusted that I was related by blood to this unreliable aunt. "Well, basically, I'm hated by both my mother and my sister, right?" I said in a dark voice. My aunt, not knowing what to say, responded, "Well, my sister is indeed terrible. But don't you think you'd be better off working somewhere else? Given all the skills you have, it's a waste to stay here." She suggested I quit, and a faintly kind light of kinship glowed in her eyes. I stood in the car, bathed in the red glow of the summer twilight, staring blankly at the distant horizon, and felt a sense of release. Maybe it's okay now, I thought. Then I turned to my aunt and said, "You're right," with a broad smile on my face. It was the first time since I joined the company that I'd smiled so genuinely. My aunt, a little puzzled by my smile, returned a somewhat sorrowful smile. As I busied myself creating handover documents and sorting out files so that anyone could understand, the end of the month and my resignation day came in the blink of an eye. When I went to the CEO's office, the sound of birds was no longer audible. My mother and sister were happily chatting. "That sales guy definitely has a thing for you." "You, that bald guy? No way." They were laughing heartily, not noticing me. When I cleared my throat, they finally turned around. My sister looked at me curiously and said, "What's up? If it's about dinner tonight, we don't need it." "I'm resigning today. Thank you for everything," I said. "Oh, is it today? I forgot," she laughed again. I felt refreshed knowing I wouldn't have to see their faces anymore. "I'm also moving out of the house, so please take care of yourselves," I added. My mother responded mechanically, "Okay, good work," with an emotionless face. I closed the door, and from inside, I heard my sister's voice saying, "Now we won't have to see that annoying face anymore." In my heart, I muttered, "Just you watch," and left the company I'd been at for so long. A week later, I finished the paperwork for a certain school and checked my phone. I noticed a missed call from my mother. In just 2 hours, she had called 14 times. I didn't return the call, having a bad feeling about it, and put my phone on silent before heading home to finish my other tasks. The missed calls from my mother kept increasing, and by the next morning, there were a total of 80 missed calls. The last call was after 2 a.m. I didn't consider calling her back at all. To me, she was now nothing more than a stranger, and I had no desire to hear her voice. I even had fleeting thoughts that if I heard her voice, I might find myself obeying her words. After all, I had been under her control for 35 long years. I ignored her phone calls with all my might, aiming to break free from her spell. I could have blocked her calls, but I thought if something happened, they might serve as evidence of her actions, so I allowed the calls to come through for a while. While I was receiving nearly 100 calls daily, at first, I hated even looking at the incoming calls. But gradually, as I got used to it, I felt a sense of satisfaction in imagining my mother's face struggling with each unanswered call. I finally realized just how terribly she had treated me. A year passed by in this manner. By then, the calls from my mother had ceased, and I had no clue what was happening with her. Throughout this year, I worked part-time while attending an online school for tax professionals and successfully passed the exams. I recently secured a job at a leading tax consultancy firm. My practical experience, along with the various tasks I had done at my mother's company, gave me the ability to see the bigger picture, which proved to be a great asset in my new company. I felt thankful for the hard work I had put in at the company over the past decade, especially at this moment. The people at my new workplace were all wonderful, and we worked together to get the job done. It was such a huge contrast from when I was left to figure everything out on my own, pushed around by my mother and sister, silently researching and working alone until the middle of the night. One day, while I was leading a fulfilling life, I had to visit a client near my mother's company. As I passed by, I noticed the windows and entrance were conspicuously dirty, and I could see the indoor plants that I had cared for now withered. On my way back, I ran into my mother, who was just coming out of her company. As soon as she saw me, she shouted, "Ah!" and came running towards me. Expecting her to berate me, I instinctively covered my face with my bag. But to my surprise, my mother approached me in a sweet, cajoling tone, saying, "Where have you been, Mary?" I felt an uncomfortable shiver run down my spine and instinctively shrank back. "I've called you so many times, you know. Did you change your smartphone?" she asked. It seemed she hadn't even considered the possibility that I might not want to contact her because I despised her. I couldn't help but wonder about her thought process, given all the things she had done to me. Ignoring my baffled expression, she went on, "Oh, but it's a good thing I saw you. Look at the state of this company. It's dreadful, isn't it? You can start working from tomorrow. I'm not angry, you know. I forgive you for leaving a year ago. Please start coming to work from tomorrow." It took me a few seconds to comprehend what my mother had just said. In her mind, did she still see me as a little girl, crying and adoring her? Mom, I'm already working at another company, and I'm happy there," I said hesitantly. Her face contorted into something monstrous, and she bellowed, "What? You're telling me you're working somewhere else while our company is in trouble? I don't give a damn about other companies. You're mine, understand?" She was causing a scene in the middle of the street. "Wait a minute, you're the one who fired me, remember? What about Lucy? What happened to her?" I retorted. My mother snorted and dismissively said, "Oh, Lucy. I thought she'd be more useful, but she was caught having affairs with 3 men from our key client. Needless to say, our dealings with them ended in a flash. If she was careful enough not to get caught, it would have been all right. So I kept her from the front office and made her do clerical work. But she couldn't even clean properly and was absolutely no good at accounting. Because of her, we couldn't even afford to hire someone else." After venting her frustrations, my mother turned to me with a grin. "That's why it's your turn, Mary. Ever since you left, the office has been in shambles. I need you to take responsibility." I had properly created a handover manual before I left and had explained everything to Lucy. Lucy probably hadn't even looked at the handover document I made, and I'm sure my mother hadn't heard anything about it either. No, even if she did hear, she'd either not remember or pretend to have forgotten. In fact, I didn't understand why they would fire me and then ask me to take responsibility. This was always how they acted, taking a tough stance, blaming others, and letting others clean up their mess. It was their usual trick. I bit my lower lip, thought of the kind faces of the people I was currently working with, and swore to myself that this was the real world. I had been living in a crazy world until now, but I wouldn't lose to this pressure anymore. It was you, the boss, who fired me, wasn't it? My mother seemed a bit startled by the change in my tone. And the reason you fired me was because I'm ugly, right? Before I knew it, a crowd had gathered around us, apparently intrigued by our argument. My mother, mindful of the eyes around her, tried to regain her composure. Her words struck me like a thunderbolt. Did I say something like that? Are you sure you didn't, Miss? My mother stuttered, trying to backtrack. No, I heard it very clearly, I responded firmly. You're going to hand over the company to my beautiful sister and fire me, the ugly one. I've been working my butt off at the company for 10 years, but you suddenly decided to hand it over to my sister who barely does any work after just 2 years. I questioned your judgment. As I explained this, the crowd around us began to stir. Really? Can that happen? That's awful. Isn't she her own mother? Are they really related by blood? Some people even started filming us. I was so angry that I didn't care. My mother started sweating and turning pale under the collective glares and murmurs of blame from the onlookers. Mary, it's a misunderstanding. Let's go inside for now, she pleaded. A misunderstanding? What am I misunderstanding? If you didn't say such a thing, shouldn't you be able to clearly say it wasn't like that? I demanded. When my mother fell silent, the people around us started to murmur. Oh, she's silent, so it's true. That's unbelievable. Then something seemed to snap in my mother. She started shouting, "Shut! It's all your fault for being ugly and gloomy. Ugly people should know their place and obediently do what beautiful people say. That's all you're good for." The people around us were taken aback by her outrageous behavior, and some began to upload videos of the incident. The ugly woman obeys the beautiful woman, the headlines in the thumbnails read. The video went viral, reaching my mother's clients, who soon decided to cease all transactions with her company. It seemed that in the year after I left, they had been engaged in shady activities like fraudulent registrations and tampering with accounting books. When the video spread, everyone seemed eager to distance themselves naturally. The company went bankrupt, and my mother and sister, who lost their source of income, eventually came to my apartment. Of course, I didn't open the door. In the end, they moved to a 45-year-old apartment without a bath, living in fear of their creditors. My sister worked part-time, often changing jobs because her attempts to take it easy by flirting with male employees due to her beauty made her disliked by her fellow part-timers. Meanwhile, everyone knew about the viral video of my mother's behavior, and she was distanced by her part-time work colleagues. It seems she now works silently by herself. On the other hand, I found a boyfriend at my new workplace. He's not handsome, but he appreciates that I work very seriously and sincerely. We're planning to get married soon, and I'm spending my days feeling truly glad that I've been diligent all this time.